It's a rare thing for a student to become a teacher, for a teacher to learn from a student, a very rare thing indeed. My first memory of a significant teacher was my rowing teacher, Steve Roll, who was a champion sculler. And as an impressionable young high school student who had never done any sport before, I learned from Steve an enormous amount, which I still carry with me. And that was essentially around the architecture of the boat, its skin, its frame, the way it interacted with the water, its outriggers and the oars, and of course the rower. And not just the rower, but 4 rowers and a cox. So you can imagine the complexity of that setup and the complexity of the water, which changes all the time, whether it's a mirror surface or whether it's a turbulent surface. How the crew adjusts, how the oar is managed, how it enters at the catch, how it leaves, so that the boat becomes almost an effortless blade that moves. And then how you use the turbulence of the water to your advantage. Of course, I've had many teachers since then, some in this room and some now gone. But as a teacher starting my career in Adelaide, I came into contact with Nicholas, a student who was rebellious, but who was very energetic and very driven, in search of things and very thirsty. And I could see very soon and very early in the history of today's institution that there wasn't a very good fit between Nicholas and the University of South Australia, where I happened to work. Nevertheless, I thought if anyone was going to be an architect, Nicholas was the one. So I encouraged him in my own way to find his own way. And so I think that's why I'm here, to introduce Nicholas to you. I realised very quickly that he was a surfer, and therefore the connection with rowing and the boat and so on became important for me, because I also had my own thirst. And I learned from Nicholas through the stories that he told me about his experiences, but also he taught me and he acculturated me into a whole world of music, much of which was very formative in my own thinking and in my own work. So it would be strange to imagine how a band like Mogwai, which Nicholas introduced me to, became important in my thinking as an academic, as a theorist of architecture, as a teacher of design, but believe me, it did. And so to the catalogue, the back catalogue of Matador records, which I swallowed with great thirst. So much later, because there was a long period, I started to receive contact from Nicholas, emails first, and then sketches, and then photographs. And I said to myself, is this Nicholas Burns actually building these buildings? How incredible that someone who passed through the University of Adelaide and had some discussion with me was now designing and building these remarkable works. And it was true, because recently he very kindly invited me to visit the little chapel in Guimarães, north of Porto, which I'm sure he'll show you. And there I saw, the growing sophistication of a very remarkable and very energetic, but also very, shall we say, someone who is always looking for interesting ways of doing things, new ways of doing things, but also absorbing the context into which he is working in a very particular way. And I think you'll see that in the work. So, Nicholas.
I've had a very different path to arrive where I am. So I'm going to discuss that path and show some work and tell some stories rather than try and describe the work. So I'm going to present in an unusual way, I guess. I live in Bali in Indonesia. It's a very beautiful place. I live by the ocean in a traditional Balinese village. There's no foreigners there. I find it very powerful being in touch with that strong culture and their primal sense of things. And after extensive travel, every month I love going home, and I find it grounding, and I find it, I can very quickly fall back into place and think. I spend the mornings on the beach, either swimming or surfing, collecting driftwood, coral, just wandering around, not really doing much. As Michael mentioned, I didn't really enjoy school during high school. I had great hope of going to university and everything was going to be different and better. During high school, I was fortuitous that I was engaged in elite level sport, which kept me out of trouble and kept me focused, and I had some very amazing people around. And it was a great excuse to get out of school because Monday afternoons, instead of being in English, I was in a float tank. Wednesday mornings, I was with a psychologist, and I could always leave early and whenever I wanted. When I quit sport at 18, I focused back on surfing, which is a wonderful thing because it took me all around the coastal areas of Australia, from north of Brisbane right around into Perth. So I've camped in all of those nooks and crannies. I've dived, I've surfed, I've climbed, I've wandered, and it gave me a real intimacy with the country. In 15-metre deep depth, the lights penetrated the crystal clear water. Dolphins coiled up the bottom and thrust upwards, breaching the dense school of garfish, hurling them into the air, hitting them with their nose a moment before plummeting back to the surface, playing. So then I went to university. I studied a year of winemaking first, which was incredibly disappointing. It was a science degree, and that's not what I imagined. However, I did join the uni climbing club, so again, took me camping and into gorges and wonderful walks and incredible climbing. A moonless clear night, generally motoring towards the indistinguishable horizon, almost silently to an offshore reef veiled by the ocean and night. Moored 28 miles offshore, John, the insane Dutch fisherman, explained that we're here to catch snapper that have arrived on the reef because the red-tailed black cockatoos are numerous in the trees by the shore, part of an intricate connection between seasonal flowers, birds, insects, streams, tides, fish, spawning, and the movement of fish from the continental shelf. So, moving into studying architecture, again, I wasn't happy, and I think going a little bit crazy perhaps, and just very frustrated and feeling very limited, not having an outlet, not finding a place, not knowing a path, not really having any hope. I started painting and had exhibitions, which was a fantastic thing to get some energy out and something I could actually do. Michael, we had these discussions about music and commonalities, but we formulated a plan to educate myself, and he recommended that I leave university. And I do two things. I think about the polar opposites, philosophy and very practical things, with the idea that everything in between can be learnt very easily. It's readily accessible. So I embarked on a bit of a mission, made everyone in my family, my girlfriend's family, and everyone else I knew very angry. And I got jobs. I worked for a stonemason, I worked for landscapers, and most importantly, I worked for rammed earth builders. So a material that I wanted to know about and I still deeply love. 45-knot southwesterly wind accelerating up the cliff, pushing the rain like sand with it. Lying on the edge, set back a little in a pocket of free turbulence post-afternoon surfing, short period waves down below. The storm passed and we walked along the creek, past the stone cottage where we lived, to an old mill for a stout. Wandering slowly back with mineral-filled skin, the electricity snapped back on, the harsh sodium light glaring down, eliminating the stars and connections. With a large rock and some persistence, the stars returned. After living in a stone cottage and working for a fisherman, I went west. So I spent 4 months living in a tent, camping in the desert of South Australia and Western Australia. We dived every day for food, spearing fish and collecting abalone, surfed incredible waves. And what I didn't realize at the time, it was a formative period of learning about siting and microclimates. And as the days progressed and new campsites were set up, just got better and better and more comfortable, which are strategies I use today in understanding sites and siting. A long drive, a wall of music, at the same time opaque and translucent, breaching the now and at the same time imagination, driving through the forest, the music resonating, staring at the ocean, the long drive again, a glass of wine on the street in the city, the same music yet deeper, quieter and louder, seeping in more, driving through the forest, confusion, stars are in the landscape where the ocean was, is the moment unfolding as an understanding is gleaned, the precise combination of no swell, 0 low tide, no moon, and a windless, cloudless night, a deepening of place was discovered, a moment perhaps not yet repeated. So when I got back from WA camping, I'd done a permaculture course. I worked with Rammed Earth Builders, who introduced me to Rammed Earth Builders in South Australia. And I set up a design and build landscape company. I did small courtyards and permaculture gardens. I built the stone myself and planted the plants. It was good fun. And around that time, I also got a small architectural project when I was 25 in inner city Adelaide for a chef. Unfortunately, that wasn't built, but I think it was a beautiful project. So after that became a big move. I lived in Flinders on the Mornington Peninsula, surfed every morning, and woke up one night in terrible fear that I was becoming content or perhaps complacent. So my wife and I, we moved to Singapore, which certainly destroyed all of that complacency and happiness. We had a terrible few years adjusting to the city from being by the ocean. However, it worked out to be an excellent move because it surrounded me with international people doing very high-level jobs, and I learned a tremendous amount. And after traveling in Australia exclusively during my own travel, I started traveling extensive internationally and discovering Asia and Japan and Europe for the first time on my own. A gate glimpsed in the corner of my eye, a quickening step and a few tears, walking in the mountains for hours waiting to return, stepping on the stones of imagination, breaching the entrance, framing spaces and time, gardens and borrowed views, stillness, absorption, eye contact, caught without thinking, around a corner, behind a shrub, over the other side, over hours. The monk sent me on my way with 3 pressed leaves from 3 seasons, a coin with a ribbon, and a small stone with an invitation to return. After 14 years in Singapore and starting to do projects in different places around the world, we moved to Bali, which again seems strange to many people. But it was a really good move because it gave space and a connection with nature and culture, and an introduction to some very intense and very different sorts of people. People are very global in their attitude, but very different because they lived in Bali for a long time. It also gave me the opportunity to make things. I started a timber workshop with 14th generation boat builders, and they're incredible people, and I cherish the interaction I have with them, learning from them, experimenting, laughing, make it so it breaks, don't worry, it's okay. A tiny island, a rock face, a little too steep and a little too high. Edge of the ocean teeming with fish, monolithic brain coral, blue-green grassy ocean, an indigo line on the horizon. Pressure building before it hit, moving away moments before it's too late. From the tiny island, not on the charts, though entrenched in memory and imagination. I've surfed a lot around Indonesia in boats and sailed from Singapore to Thailand with incredible people and learned about many parts of the marine ecology and weather and navigation. And I'm now using that in projects in different parts of the world. One of them you would have seen is on a small island called Principe off the west coast of Africa, straddling the equator. I'll let the images say the rest. Mm-hmm.